Hi, I'm Ingrid Bårdsdatter and I work at the guidance section at the Inland Norway University of Applied Sciences as an assistant professor and a PhD fellow. And I'm here to talk to you today about the Nordic model for welfare and how that is connected to social justice and career guidance. So first I'd like to show you this map, which is a satirical map of how the Americans view Europe. So as you can see, there's all sorts of things going on in Europe from an American point of view. We've got godfathers, we've got smelly armpits, we've got dirty porn, and we've got something very odd going on at the far end of the Black Sea. But what we've also got is in the northernest countries of this region, we've got something that can be seen, or that the American can see, as a socialist union. So coming from an American actually being called a socialist is not really a compliment. And being northerners ourselves, coming from these Nordic countries, we might agree that a socialist union is not exactly what it is. But it is something special. It is something going on in this region that actually sets these Nordic countries apart from the rest of Europe. And in this lecture, I would like to argue that what that specialness is especially connected to thinking about social justice, which is also why thinking about career guidance and social justice together is important. So what is going on in this region? Some people talk about Nordicity or the Nordic, or some people talk about the avant-garde of the Nordic countries. And to understand this phenomenon, I think that it's really useful to talk about the concept of culture. The concept of several concepts of culture, or several theories of culture, say that culture is the somewhat intangible but sometimes tangible things that make up a culture, that characterize a culture. And culture is the thing that sort of separates one group from another group. So what creates these borders between these groups might be religion, it might be ethnicity, it might be nationality. But there is something that sets these groups apart from each other. And what they share are commonly referred to as a culture. So theories on culture often liken the concept of culture to an iceberg, where you'll see a tip of an iceberg over the sea line, and you just know that there's just so much more iceberg going on under the sea line that you cannot really reach, but you just know it is there. So these different layers of the iceberg are understood as, for instance, over the sea line you'll see the cultural expressions, the manifestations, those things that you would say are typical to a culture. So coming from Norway, I would say that our national costume, the bunad, the way we celebrate our national holiday, 17th of May, skiing, that kind of thing, are typically Norwegian things that represent culture in some way. At the sea line, where sometimes you will see what's going on just under the surface because the sea ripples, you will find those things within a culture that are not so openly visible to the naked eye, but things that are awakened when we talk about them, when we ask ourselves what's good, what's right, what's not. And these are the values and norms that guide our thinking about things that happen or new elements that we have to consider. And under the sea line, where you know that the rest of the iceberg is, which is huge and which is hidden from view, you'll find the profound assumptions, the underpinning cultural themes that are automated, that are integrated, that show themselves as emotional responses when a cultural actor is challenged. And these profound assumptions, they will sometimes come out as fears, as automated responses to something new, and sometimes they will even conflict with the expressed values and norms. And some people would theorize that is why coming into a new culture, you might feel a certain dissonance between the culture being a warm and supportive one and how you are actually met and greeted by the actors of the culture and how supported and welcome you actually feel. So when it comes to Nordicity and the Nordic culture, then we should be able to talk about the cultural expressions, the manifestations of this culture. We should be able to discuss the values and norms about how the world ideally should be and what we think is important about it. And perhaps the profound assumptions will guide us into understanding how that is important to us and perhaps what we need to do to protect it. So, to talk about the Nordic culture, I think one important step is to also talk about the region of the Nordic and how it kind of came into be. And by talking about that, it becomes clear that matters of social justice is important, and it has been for a very long time. So the Nordic countries are Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Iceland, Greenland, Faroe Islands, and Åland. And what is interesting about these countries is that they were all formed or reformed in relatively recent times. So while Sweden and Denmark perhaps have a longer history than the other countries, then it's worth to note that they had to reform themselves after unions being dispersed and, for instance, Norway, Iceland, Greenland, and these Faroe Islands and Åland separated from these unions and established themselves on their own. So these states, they formed and reformed during a period of a couple of hundred years from the 19th century and to the middle of the 20th century. And what was interesting about them is that they, after the unions disbanded and the state started developing, they did so concurrently but not in cooperation. But the results of these developments in these states were similar, and that is because they developed roughly at the same time, under the same kind of influences, and that affected what the states would look like. For instance, in these centuries, the 18th, 19th, 20th century, the world saw several revolutions. For instance, in France, where the people rose and called for the right to citizenship, the right to equality and freedom. And in the United States, there was a call for the states to become independent and to form the United States. And in Europe, there was lots of social unrest, where the lower classes and workers wanted to rise and claim the rights as citizens, much influenced by, for instance, communist trends and thinking that said that everybody should be equal and that people have a right of their own. And these major political trends influenced the building of the states of the Nordic countries, where also in these countries you could see a massive migration from rural areas to urban areas because of, for instance, industrialization, creating these vast workplaces, industrial workplaces where people gathered. This created a whole new set of social challenges that created a need to design policies and instruments of the state that would regulate this new social situation. And while the conservatives was also a very strong force in this time, The new policies that saw the light of day in this period were heavily influenced by this communist thinking, where the rights of the people were strong. So while the Nordic countries may not have been completely communist because the power of the conservative force was too strong, they ended up somewhere in between, and that is the social democratic political flavor. And as the states developed, and they could see this, they were having the same set of challenges and same set of limitations and opportunities, being in the same kind of geographical region, and also that they were developing the policies in more or less the same direction. There was a sense of community and a sense of a need for cooperation that arose, that in the first half of the 20th century made it necessary for these states to organize, or they at least saw the advantage of organizing. That was the background for forming the Nordic Council from the 50s. Now, what the Nordic Council also did was not just be this hub of policy making and makers that could cooperate and coordinate. What they also saw, this brand of policy, this political flair that they had created, the social democratic flair, was something that would set the Nordic countries apart from the rest of Europe, which were much more conservative, much more traditionally oriented. And they started using this political trend as a brand. And one of the important works that the Nordic Council did in this period of time was to start this process of using the Nordic model and the Nordic policy flair as a brand, as a basis for cooperation with other countries. And that was the basis of the avant-garde of the Nordic model. I have now got to the end of part 1 of this lecture. I would like to welcome you all to part 2 of this lecture, where I will talk more about what the Nordic model for welfare actually is, how that is connected to social justice, and hopefully how that is connected to career guidance. Thank you. See you soon.